Today we will examine the peculiar term Bioleninism, as coined by Spandrel. Bioleninism, or biological Leninism, is a topic that is increasingly present in right-wing discourse, if not in these specific terms. As we go through this topic, I want you to keep in mind Dr. Edward Dutton's idea of spiteful mutants, as it is very much the same idea as Spandrel's. Bioleninism comes from a three-part series of blog posts by Spandrel. Parts 1 and 2 will be discussed here. I view these parts as being developmental, whereas Part 3 is concise to the point of it not making any sense to edit it at all except to skip the first few introductory sentences. So in the next video, I will just do a near-complete read-through of Part 3 without any pauses. Afterwards, there will be another video discussing and building on the ideas, but it will be released at a later date. For now, just consider the idea of Bioleninism in of itself as Spandrel expressed it. Bioleninism explains why, as Mencius Moldbug noted, quote, Cthulhu may swim slowly, but he only swims left, end quote. It is an explanation of how the cathedral formed. Spandrel writes for us a quick summary of the political developments that led to liberalism. Quote, the problem with feudalism is that it's really hard to get anything done. It's hard to raise taxes. It's hard to get anything built. A state, like any organization, but even more so, wants to get things done. It wants to grow, expand its power and influence, and so feudalism led to absolutism, and absolutism led to liberalism. Liberal states were strong, had armies of bureaucrats, and tax revenues that feudal states could only dream of. But while they were effective, they were a mess. Feudalism is good at generating loyalty. Liberalism is awful at that. And loyalty is very important. The fundamental problem of politics is the distinction between friend and foe, said Schmidt. A friend is someone who is loyal. End quote. Spandrel has identified the key glue that holds together strong governments, and that is loyalty. Loyalty is reliable. You don't need to spend any time arguing and convincing. A person who is loyal to you will do what you want them to do. Quote, say what you will about the Soviet Union. The Communist Party was loyal. They got things done. Every crazy and stupid thing that the Politburo approved got done. Yes, it took a while to achieve that result. Stalin had to kill a lot of people. But it wasn't through sheer terror and cruelty that the Communist Party worked. The Communist Party had a system, which worked. The destruction of that world by enlightened liberals resulted in a ruling class which was orders of magnitude less cohesive and orderly. You might be a libertarian and think that is a good thing, and you may have a point, but any organization wants to fight entropy and ensure its stability and reproduction. Liberalism historically has shown itself incapable of that. Leninism was the first solution to that problem. End quote. There is a will to power in the natural order of the world, and states possess it as much as anything else. Liberalism can endure its own contradictions when they are external. Woodrow Wilson in his destruction of the old world, as well as FDR finishing the job, and the neoconservatives in seeking to afflict other nations with the debilitating effects of liberal democracy, all contradicted liberalism in their global Machiavellian politics. On the home front, liberalism must accept the natural hierarchy that emerges, but the problem with the natural hierarchy is that only a minority of people will end up with high status, and thus most people will have no incentive to be loyal to the regime. The people with high status in a liberal system have no particular affinity for each other either. Leninism is a solution to this problem that fulfills the status desires of the majority and creates a cohesive ruling class to see it through. But socialism doesn't just work because it promises higher status. Quote, socialism works not only because it promises higher status to a lot of people. Socialism is catnip because it promises status to people who, deep down, know they shouldn't have it. There is such a thing as natural law, the natural state of any normally functioning human society. Basic biology tells us people are different. Some are more intelligent, more attractive, more crafty and popular. Everybody knows, deep in their lizard brains, how human mating works. Women are attracted to the top dogs. Being generous, all human societies default to a Pareto distribution where 20% of people are high status, and everyone else just has to put up with their inferiority for life. That's just how it works. Socialism, though, promised to change that, and Marx showed they had a good plan. Lenin then put that plan to work in practice. What did Lenin do? Exterminate the natural aristocracy of Russia, and build a ruling class with a bunch of low-status people. Workers, peasants, Jews, Latvians, Ukrainians. Lenin went out of his way to recruit everyone who had a grudge against imperial Russian society, and it worked brilliantly. The Bolsheviks, a small party with little popular support, won the Civil War, and became the awesome Soviet Union. The early Soviet Union promoted minorities, women, sexual deviants, atheists, cultists, and every kind of weirdo. Everybody but intelligent conservative Russians of good families. The same happened in China, where e.g. the 5 provinces which formed the southern Mongolian steppe were joined up into, quote, Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region and, quote, what Saylor calls, quote, consolidate and surrender, end quote. In communist countries, pedigree was very important. You couldn't get far in the party if you had any little kulak, noble, or landowner ancestry. Only peasants and workers were trusted. Why? Because only peasants and workers could be trusted to be loyal. Rich people, or people with the inborn traits which led to being rich, will always have status in any natural society. They will always do all right. That's why they can't be trusted. The stakes are never high for them. If anything, they'd rather have more freedom to realize their talents. People of peasant stock, though, they came from the dregs of society. They know very well that all they have was given to them by the party, and so they will be loyal to the death, because they know it, if the communist regime falls, their status will fall as fast as a hammer in a well. And the same goes for everyone else, especially those ethnic minorities. End quote. The left's alliances may seem fragile to some, but a proper analysis of the motivations of each individual in each group shows that there is an overriding factor of necessity that will allow even the most opposed people to remain in cohesion. The left is a grand coalition of losers who, under normal conditions, would be of low status, but through collective action have displaced those who would otherwise have high status. The people on the left know this, and thus will remain loyal to the left, despite everything else, in order to prevent a return to normalcy, in which they would be reduced back to a lower status. Of course, there are always risks involved when attempting to form such a coalition. Spandrel continues, quote, ethnics were tricky though because they always had a gambit which could increase their status even further. Independence. Which is why both Russia and China, soon after consolidating the regime, started to crack down on ethnics. Stalin famously purged Jews from the Politburo, used World War II to restore most of the Tsar's territory, and run such a Russia-centered state that to this day people in Kyrgyzstan speak Russian. The same in China. A little-known fact of the Cultural Revolution was the huge, bloody purge in Mongolia and the destruction of many temples in Tibet. After that was done with, the Communist Party became this strong, stable, and smooth machine. So again, the genius of Leninism was in building a ruling class from scratch and making it cohesive by explicitly choosing people from low-status groups, ensuring they would be loyal to the party given they had much to lose. It worked so well it was the marvel of the intellectual classes of the whole world for 100 years. Meanwhile, what was the West doing? The West, that die-hard enemy of worldwide communism, led by the United States. What has been the American response to Leninism? Look around you, read Vox, put on TV. Okay, that's enough. Who is high status in the West today? Women, homosexuals, transsexuals, Muslims, blacks. There's even movements propping up disabled and fat people. What progressivism is running is hyper-Leninism, biological Leninism. When communism took over Russia and China, those were still very poor, semi-traditional societies, plenty of semi-starved peasants around, so you could run a Leninist party just on class resentments. Quote, never forget class struggle, end quote, Mao liked to say. Never forget you used to be a serf, and you're not one now, thanks to me, he meant. In the West, though, by 1945, when peace and order was enforced by the United States, the economy had improved to the point where class struggle just didn't work as a generator of loyalty. Life was good. The proletariat could all afford a car and even vacations. Traditional society was dead. The old status ladders based on family pedigree and land-based wealth were also dead. The West in 1960 was a wealthy, industrial, meritocratic society where status was based on one's talent, productivity, and natural ability to schmooze oneself into the ruling class. Of course, liberal politics kept being a mess. No cohesion in a ruling class, which has no good incentive to stick to each other. But of course, the incentive is still out there. A cohesive ruling class can monopolize power, and extract rents from the whole society forever. The ghost of Lenin is always there. And so the arrow of history kept bending in Lenin's direction. The West started to build up a Leninist power structure. Not overtly, not as a conscious plan. It just worked that way because the incentives were out there for everyone to see. And so, slowly we got it. Biological Leninism. That's the nature of the cathedral. End quote. Biological Leninism is Leninism spawned from the evolutionary process of a multitude of persons individually realizing the potential to incrementally gain power by exploiting the absence of a cohesive ruling class. There are those such as Gramsci who realized the potential of this method, and even some who followed through on this, but the cathedral is primarily something that has evolved as a bottom-up power structure. Gramsci and his followers didn't organize this, nor did anyone else. They simply provided an extra push. There may have been no cohesive ruling class, but there were certainly many high-status people to push out of the way. Spandrel describes them. Quote, "If you live in a free society and your status is determined by your natural performance, then it follows that to build a cohesive Leninist ruling class, you need to recruit those who have natural low status. In any society, men have higher performance than women. They are stronger, they work harder, they have a higher variance, which means a fatter right tail in all traits, more geniuses, and they have the incentive to perform what the natural mating market provides. That's the patriarchy for you. Now, I don't want to overstress the biology part here. It's not the fact that all men are better workers than women. In a patriarchy, there's plenty of unearned status for men, but that's how it works. The core of society is the natural performance of men. Those men will naturally build a society which benefits them as men. Some men free ride on that, some women get a bad deal. Lots of structural inertia there. But the core is real. To get to the point, in 1960 we had a white men patriarchy. This was perfectly natural. Every society with a substantial proportion of white men will end up being ruled by a cabal of white men. Much of it's biology. Part of it is also social capital, good cultural practices accumulated since the 15th century. White men just run stuff better. They are natural high status. But again, nature makes for messy politics. There is no social value on acknowledging truth. Everybody can see that. The signaling value is in lies, in the unnatural. As Moldbug put it, quote, "In many ways, nonsense is a more effective organizing tool than the truth. Anyone can believe in the truth. To believe in nonsense is an unforgeable demonstration of loyalty. It serves as a political uniform. And if you have a uniform, you have an army." End quote.